lied to yourself at times, now you're falling apart. Soon giving in this time, 'cause we're falling apart.
Hello there, coming to you live from the bunker. At least I think it's the bunker. Is it? Yeah, I think it is. Coming to you live from the bunker. This is a special report for JW Watch, the show that keeps a close eye on all things JW, offering Jehovah's Witnesses a more objective viewpoint on current developments that the governing body almost certainly doesn't want them to hear. On April 30th, governing body member Mark Sanderson made an appearance at a special assembly in Warsaw, Poland, at which he made a number of comments about the war in Ukraine, which has caused over 3 million Ukrainian refugees to flee to Poland. Thanks to a leak from a Polish insider, Jonathan W. Thank you, by the way, Jonathan. We at JW Watch have been able to acquire footage of Sanderson's talk, and I will be showing you said footage, or specifically the most interesting parts. Now, a few disclaimers before we get underway. This has been edited. It's needed to be edited because it's an interpreted talk. So if we were to include all of the interpreting into Polish, it would dramatically increase the length of this video. Apologies to those of you tuning in from Poland. I'm sure there are many doing so, but we're just going to have to keep this English only, I'm afraid. So Tibor, bless him, has had the unenviable task of going through over an hour of this interpreted talk and editing it down so that it's just Mark Sanderson talking. So if it looks a little bit disjointed, or you occasionally hear a little snippet of the interpreter's voice, you know that that's the reason why. You'll just have to take my word for it that we haven't done anything to the actual flow of the talk. In other words, we've not misquoted Mark Sanderson. We have quoted him honestly. So what you see him saying is what he's saying in the order that he is saying it. The other important thing I wanted to mention is, as you may have noticed, this video is a fundraiser, or part of a fundraiser. Viewers of the Lloyd Evans channel have so far been incredibly generous in collecting over $2,200 for UNICEF to help and assist UNICEF in its aid efforts in Ukraine. So any monetization related to this video goes straight to UNICEF, because we're talking about Ukraine, aren't we? So that's, I guess, the disclaimers out of the way. Just a quick check. We currently have, because we're streaming on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and I'm noticing 168 at the moment watching. That's fantastic. Maybe more will join us as the live stream progresses. But without further ado, let's look at the talk, shall we?
Well, brothers, we are absolutely delighted to be with you here in Warsaw. And we are so happy that our brothers and sisters across Poland, across Ukraine, and also in the Donbass region are tied in with us for this program. Would you like to welcome all of them?
So yeah, that was an interesting introduction. I find it interesting that the Donbass region is being mentioned separately, because unless my geography is terribly wrong, it's the whole, one of the issues is that the Donbass region is Ukraine, you know? So it's a little bit strange that he should single out the Donbass region. But in any case, this is Mark Sanderson beginning his talk, and there is rapturous applause, which we have abbreviated. But trust me, people appreciate having Mark on the stage, as is evident by the reception he receives in Warsaw.
We know that hard times raise hard questions. In addition to the trials that we're all experiencing because we're living in the last days, you, dear brothers and sisters, have been going through a tremendous period of stress. Now, you know the situation. In February, Russia invaded Ukraine, but immediately, the branch office in Ukraine organized 27 disaster relief committees. The brothers here in Poland formed 16 disaster relief committees. And something similar has happened in Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, and many other places. So we appreciate that many of you have had to leave your homes. You've had to leave behind your jobs and your possessions. You've had to leave your family members, and perhaps you have even lost some of your family members in death. Now, in addition to coping with all of those things, some of you may also have serious health problems that make it very difficult to cope with this situation. Right. And then add to it one of the worst things that we have to face in situations like this. That is just simply the uncertainty, just not knowing where the situation is leading, not knowing what's going to come next, having to make decisions, what are you going to do? And wondering, how are things going to work out for yourselves and your families? Well, let me assure you, brothers, that we do understand this situation, and that our brothers and sisters all over the world are thinking about you, and they are praying on your behalf. I have to say, at World Headquarters in Warwick, our brothers pray on behalf of the brothers in Ukraine and Russia every day. And that also applies to the meetings of the governing body, the branch committee, and all the other committees. Well, what does all that mean? It means that you are very, very loved people. And isn't it wonderful to know that even during these difficult times, the love of Jehovah is so obvious toward all of you?
Apparently it's obvious, the love of Jehovah towards the people of Ukraine. Mark Sanderson there reassuring Ukrainians, a number of whom will surely be in the audience, because as I mentioned, Poland has so far received over 3 million refugees from Poland, a percentage of whom, a fraction of whom will almost certainly be Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, it's inevitable that Mark Sanderson will be directly addressing, in fact he said so at the beginning, didn't he? He's directly addressing people in Ukraine, and the overwhelming message seems to be thoughts and prayers. We're sending thoughts and prayers. You are prayed about every day at Warwick. And something a little bit more concrete, arguably, 27 disaster relief committees set up in Ukraine, and 16 disaster relief committees set up in Poland, and even more in other countries, throwing numbers at us, which, to be completely honest, means very, very little. I mean, what is a disaster relief committee? It's a group of elders and circuit overseers who get together and decide on how best to look after people of their own religion. And as I've said in previous videos, there is a lot, or in a previous video, there's a lot to be said for looking after people in your own religion. It's a commendable thing to do. Any form of aid to any group, even if it's from the group itself, at a time of immense hardship, is to be applauded. I just don't see anything remotely unique about the Jehovah's Witness response to the war in Ukraine. In fact, as I mentioned in the last episode of the JW Watch episode, what they have done is do something similar to what they did with COVID when COVID first broke out. They've made a whole big doomsday thing out of it and pointed to the significance of Russia being, as they understand it, the king of the north. So, yeah, interesting how Mr. Sanderson has begun his talk.
At this, the serpent said to the woman, "You certainly will not die. God knows that in the very day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and bad." What was the devil saying to Eve? He was saying, you're going to be happier if you stop listening to God. You should rule yourself. You should be independent from Jehovah. Well, Eve agreed, and Adam joined her. But this situation was not just an attack on God's name and his reputation. It was an attack on God's sovereignty. You see, his right to be the absolute ruler of his creation. Well, now Jehovah could have just stepped in and destroyed them, but he didn't. He determined to allow time to pass so that people could rule themselves. And then it would become clear whether they really would be better off without God or not. Well, time would tell. Time would give the answer. But brothers and sisters, what has time revealed? Man has tried every type of government, one right after another. There have been monarchies and democracies. There have been dictatorships. There's been fascism and communism. But none of them have brought happiness to mankind. Throughout all of it, humans have been caught in the middle, and people have suffered miserably. They've faced injustice, broken families, cruel treatment, poverty, hunger, sickness, and death. It's just exactly what the Bible says.
So this is very interesting. This is actually...
The Bible says that it does...
I'll just reverse that a little bit. This is actually a part of the talk where Mark Sanderson reminds Jehovah's Witnesses watching, particularly those who might have experienced traumatic events fleeing Ukraine or in Ukraine. He reminds them of the reason for suffering. Because apparently there's a reason for it, which is totally explainable. He even says, we're used to encountering this argument of why does God permit suffering in the preaching work, but then when the suffering happens to us personally, suddenly we might find ourselves having to explain it to ourselves all over again. And so what he's doing here is he's giving just an abbreviated version of what the argument is. And the argument is, oh, it's all about God's sovereignty. God needs to allow thousands of years of human suffering to prove a point. Make of that what you will. If that's the sort of God we should be worshipping, someone who needs to sit arms folded through millennia of death and cruelty, then fine, go for it. But it's interesting how Mark Sanderson singles out, when he's listing the failings of human governments, he says that no matter what form of government we've experienced or experimented with, it's led to injustice, it's led to broken families, and it's led to cruelty. He's describing exactly what the organization he, along with 7 others, helms. He's describing exactly what this organization is responsible for, particularly when we think of shunning and the cruelty and injustice that is often experienced by survivors of child sexual abuse. I'm going to find the part where I paused him. Bear with me one moment.
The Bible says that it does not belong to a man who is walking even to direct his step. Well, by allowing this time to pass, Jehovah is establishing a precedent. Now, we're not absolutely at the end of this at this time, but now I want to ask you a question. Isn't it clear, even now, that Satan's rule has been a total and complete disaster. Do you agree?
So my question at this point would be, if it's clear, even now, that human rule has been a complete and utter disaster, what are we waiting for? You know? If that's the whole point, which is the argument that Mark Sanderson has just made, the whole reason why we have to live with injustice and suffering and death, and in the case of Ukraine, war and carnage, the whole reason is apparently so that God can prove a point about his sovereignty. And what he's just said there, to rapturous applause, is, isn't it already obvious? Well, if it is already obvious, how do you explain the fact that it's still continuing? And as we speak, more people are dying, including, we've learned, some Jehovah's Witnesses in Ukraine. So he's obviously not interested in explaining away that inconsistency, but it's there nonetheless.
But now here's another question. Why is it, during times of distress, that it appears that some people are protected and others are not? Does it mean that some were faithful to Jehovah and the others were not faithful? Well, let's look at the answer. You see, the Bible clearly shows that at times, Jehovah really has intervened to save individuals. But was that the rule? In other words, is that what always happened? Or was it the exception? Well, let's look at some examples that we remember. So think of the 3 faithful Hebrews. Now, we remember how Jehovah sent his angel and he rescued those 3 faithful Hebrews from the fiery furnace. But think about other faithful prophets of Jehovah. They were just as faithful, but they were put to death. Here's another example. The Apostle Peter was delivered from the prison where he was imprisoned by Herod Agrippa I. It was a miraculous delivery. But this same king also imprisoned the disciple James, and James was put to death by that same ruler. Jehovah did not intervene to stop. And think of this third example. Now, Jehovah gave the apostles the power to cure the sick and even to raise the dead. But you remember that the Apostle Paul appealed to Jehovah 3 times that he would take away that thorn in his flesh. And we understand that that was probably a physical health problem. But Jehovah did not do it. He did not take that infirmity away from him. So what does this teach us? Well, the reality is that when a catastrophe strikes, anyone can be affected. Here's the Bible principle. It's Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 11. So let's read it together. It says, I have seen something further under the sun, that the swift do not always win the race, nor do the mighty win the battle, nor do the wise always have the food, nor do the intelligent always have the riches, nor do those with knowledge always have success, because time and unexpected events overtake them all. So that's the reality. As humans, we are subject to time and unexpected events. And often we find ourselves in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So, one of the viewers has anticipated my criticism here. Well done, Alex. Either he is an interventionist God or he is not, like Lloyd says Alex. Yes, that's exactly my point. So Mark here is pointing out the obvious, which is that clearly Jehovah's Witnesses suffer when there are events like wars. And again, we know some Jehovah's Witnesses have already died. We know tens of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses have died in COVID. But then you get, occasionally, stories of where Jehovah's Witnesses have miraculously made it through some dangerous situation, including situations where their lives were threatened in some way. And, you know, again, is God interventionist or not? I always drew comfort from this scripture in Ecclesiastes, in the previous version of the Bible, the pre-2013 edition, the wording was time and unforeseen occurrences befall us all. I drew comfort from that when my mother died, because I thought, yeah, nobody is immune. Nobody has special protection from God. But the problem we're seeing is that increasingly in Jehovah's Witness propaganda, they are invoking this concept of Jehovah's hand, directly saying that God is intervening in Earth's affairs. One example, during the last annual meeting, they mentioned that God was responsible for repositioning a trailer in Australia, so that some filming of a Jesus series could take place. God intervened there. So, which is it? Is it time and unforeseen occurrence befall us all, or God intervenes and helps sort out logistical issues? I mean, which one is it, Mark Sanderson? Again, inconsistencies which he is hopeless at either acknowledging or addressing.
What is Jehovah doing for us right now? Well, you brothers know the answer to this question. No doubt you personally have been experiencing the love, the kindness, the generosity, and the support from your own brothers and sisters. Our brothers in Ukraine and in Poland have done a wonderful job in risking their safety, risking their lives to transport supplies, to transport people to safer areas. And some of our brothers have even given their lives to accomplish this work. How do you feel about all of this love that has been shown to you, brothers? How do you feel about it?
At this point, I was thinking, whoa, hold on a minute, Mark. You've just told us. Well, first of all, it's a back-patting exercise, isn't it? We are God's organization because we look out for each other. Again, I don't follow that argumentation. I think it's a fairly routine thing for religions to look out for their own. But he just casually mentions some of our brothers, in other words, multiple Jehovah's Witnesses, have given their lives in the aid efforts pertaining to Ukraine. That's a big deal. Why aren't we talking about these people? It's just a passing mention that among the witnesses who have died purely because they're again in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're in a theater of war, and it's expected that people will die when there's a war happening. But some have died trying to help others. I want to hear more about these individuals, but you just get the impression that all praise and all attention and all esteem should go to the governing body. That's at least the impression I get. So I thought that was a really odd little snippet that he included. Why aren't we hearing more about these brave individuals who apparently died trying to help others?
The most important protection that we need is spiritual protection. And that's the protection that Jehovah has promised all of us. You see, physical protection is only temporary, but spiritual protection is forever. It reminds us of what the Bible says here in Romans chapter 14 and verse 8. It says, "For if we live to Jehovah. And if we die to Jehovah. So both if we live and if we die, we belong to Jehovah." So those simple words, what do they mean? It means that whether we live or whether we die, if we have a good relationship with Jehovah, we are completely safe with him.
So this was, I guess, a telling moment in which again, we see what the real purpose of quote-unquote aid efforts are. Usually when there is a humanitarian crisis, aid agencies are interested in making sure people are warm and fed and safe. But what Mark Sanderson is doing here is he's putting his cards on the table and saying, actually, for our organization, which again looks out for its own, the main priority is quote-unquote spiritual protection. That's the most important thing, according to him. And the concern I would have is, well, isn't this something that benefits the organization more than the individual? It's almost as though there's a crisis that could lead to people being distracted from their worship because they have more pressing things to attend to, such as their well-being, their safety. And an organization steps in that says, we're going to look after you. By the way, our priority is your spiritual protection. In other words, we really don't want to lose you because of this. There's a strong whiff of ulterior motive, isn't there? When you're most concerned about making sure you don't lose members because of a calamity that is claiming lives. Something to think about there.
But now let's switch gears and let's talk about how we can cope with this adverse situation. Now, our goal should be not just to survive this period, but we want to come out of this period with even stronger faith and with an even closer relationship with Jehovah. And that's what Jehovah has been teaching us every day, every week, every month, throughout our time in the truth. Think about our recent year text, Isaiah 30:15. Your strength will be in keeping calm and showing trust. Isn't it an amazing thing to consider that Isaiah 30:15 was the day text on the day when Russia invaded Ukraine? What a powerful reminder of what Jehovah was trying to tell his people.
What do I even need to say here? Mark Sanderson here claiming that there's special significance to the fact that on the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, the year text was Isaiah 30:15. I think what you mean, Mark, is that Isaiah 30:15 has just randomly been assigned and say something that you find profound when, in fact, there's no real significance, is there? There could have been any number of scriptures, any number of verses on that particular day that could have had some kind of, could have been retrospectively been assigned some kind of significance. So this is, again, what does this say about God? This is the sort of God we have to admire and respect and worship. He's allowing Jehovah's Witnesses to die in Ukraine, including, we've just learned, Jehovah's Witnesses dying trying to help other people. And his way of doing something is to make sure they have a certain text to read on the day that Russian tanks first cross over the Ukrainian border. That's his plan at making things more tolerable. I'm not convinced. I'm not in any way persuaded to, or endeared towards a God who tackles problems in such an inefficient way.
Now, here's a recent experience from Ukraine. A doctor in Ukraine asked one of our brothers whether Jehovah's Witnesses are taking up arms to defend the country. Well, the brother explained that we love our neighbors and our Bible-trained conscience does not allow us to take up arms. The brother also explained that many of our fellow believers in Russia are in prison for this position, and that not a single Jehovah's Witness from Russia came to fight against Ukraine. If all people had such an attitude toward war, there'd be no war at all. Well, the brother also explained all about the scope of our Bible educational work. And he also explained that we are providing humanitarian help and care for refugees. Well, the doctor was very impressed, and he asked for literature. He even gave our brother his phone number, and since that time, the brother has been sharing articles with him. How do you think that brother feels about what has come about just from his effort to witness? No doubt he has tremendous joy that keeps going just because he made the effort to preach.
So, let me get this straight. You know, we're talking about this anecdote in the context of a governing body member flying into Poland to address an audience that is comprised, you know, a significant percentage of which is comprised of Ukrainians. And out of all of the stories at his disposal that he could share to explain why his organization is exceptional and head and shoulders above all others and, you know, God's chosen organization, is, oh, there was this doctor that got preached to and got told a bunch of stuff, some of which was true, some of which wasn't. I'm thinking where he says we are providing humanitarian assistance and aid to refugees. Yes, I've actually seen in person Jehovah's Witnesses at the Hungarian border with the jw.org sign. They weren't there to give humanitarian aid to everyone. They weren't offering accommodation to Catholics or Muslims or Orthodox. They were there to give assistance purely to their own. So I'm sorry, that piece of information, if that's how it was presented to the doctor, is incorrect and misleading. But even if everything that was said to the doctor is true, what was the outcome? Did the doctor start a Bible study? Did he get baptized? No, the outcome was, well, since then, the brother has been able to share more material with the doctor, which could mean anything. It could mean literally just bombarding him with emails, you know, that it means nothing. And that's apparently one of the best anecdotes to come out of this. I mean, I think there are one or two other anecdotes in his talk, and I don't think I've included all of them. But what an underwhelming story to be including. If that's the best that Mark's got, or among the best stories that he can share, again, I'm just not persuaded that anything special is happening. I think what we're seeing with the Ukraine war is exactly what we've come to expect, which is a doomsday group exploiting on calamity to try and strengthen its grip on people's minds.
So make sure, dear brothers and sisters, make sure that you don't neglect these basic things that can help you to stay strong spiritually during these difficult times. But here are some other simple, practical things that we also want to mention. Here's the first one. Find a good friend to talk with. Just being able to express yourself to a good friend can often take away some of your stress and anxiety. Here's the second one. Worrying about all of the things that could happen. Otherwise, anxiety can completely take over your mind. One famous saying says that worry does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow. It empties today of its strength. So true. Many of the things that we worry about never happen, but in the meantime, we lose all of our energy worrying. Here's the third one. Distinguish between the things that you can change in your life and the things that you can't. Sometimes there are things that we just have to accept. And if we understand that, then we can develop a more positive attitude. Here's the fourth. Be patient and be forgiving. When so many of you brothers and sisters from Ukraine have been displaced either to other countries or even within Ukraine, it has just been like a miracle how our brothers and sisters have come to your aid. But that may mean that you're living with other people now. Well, just being realistic, there are going to be times when we're going to irritate one another. But if we become angry or we lose control, that's only going to make the situation worse. So whether you're the person providing the help or you're the person receiving it, we need to be patient with each other. And what if your feelings are hurt about something? Well, use that situation as an opportunity to grow in forgiveness and in love.
So, again, earlier in the talk, we heard it said very plainly that in times of calamity, in times of disaster, when people are going through a traumatic experience, the priority is quote, spiritual protection. Spiritual protection is the most important thing. So, leading up to these comments that we've just heard, Mark Sanderson has been talking about the need to stick to the spiritual routine, make sure you're going to all of your meetings, make sure you're doing your day's text, make sure you're praying. And then he decides to get practical. And he says, well, in addition to doing all of these things so that we are spiritually protected, what practical things could we do? Bear in mind, again, addressing an audience that is comprised at least partly of people who have fled a war zone, who may have either been injured horrifically themselves or may have experienced first-hand carnage, who may be indeed traumatized by what they've experienced. And we know how traumatic war can be. And Mark Sanderson comes in here with practical suggestions for such ones. And his top 4 things are: find a friend to talk to. In other words, another Jehovah's Witness, because you're not allowed to be friends, are you, with anyone who's not a Jehovah's Witness? Find a friend. Don't worry was his second one. Just don't worry. What? To quote Bob Marley, don't worry, be happy. That was his second suggestion. A third, distinguish between things that you can change and things that you can't change. Okay. And fourth, be patient. That's it. That's his wisdom for people who have been through and are in many cases still going through a traumatic experience, because apparently witnesses in Ukraine have been watching this talk. That's his advice. And where is just the simple statement, please consider seeking out a mental health professional if possible, if your anxiety is too much to deal with. You know, I say this in voicemail after voicemail. Who are we, quite frankly, to wade into issues that affect people so profoundly that it's causing them depression and anxiety and trauma? Who, frankly, are we as untrained people who haven't devoted years of their lives to understanding how the brain works and how emotions work? Who the hell do we think we are if we're going to turn to a traumatized person who has either fled or is still in a war zone and say, just don't worry? Just don't worry, be patient, talk to a friend. You know, just the incompetence of this man, bridled with his obvious arrogance and apparent appreciation of his own intellect, is just mind-boggling. And I think it's grossly irresponsible, quite frankly, that in this particular moment, when there was an opportunity to step up to the lectern and speak to people who have been through hell, his fellow believers, people looking up to him for some words of wisdom, he couldn't bring himself to say, watch out for your mental health. You've been through a traumatic ordeal, and it may be that you need the help of a mental health professional. Apparently, that wasn't on his list.
Well, I want to just remind you one more time just how much the governing body loves all of you, brothers and sisters. We are very, very much concerned and interested in each and every one of you. And we are going to continue to do everything that is in the power of our hand to help you. That means that we are going to make sure that you have the spiritual food that you need, but we are also going to work hard to make sure you have the basic necessities of life. The brothers in the branch offices in Ukraine and in Poland and other nearby branches have been working so hard in caring for all of these arrangements. It truly has touched my heart personally to see the love that they have manifested. So would we all like to say thank you to the branch committees in Ukraine and in Poland for the hard work that they've been doing and for their love?
That's something that apparently needed to happen. Again, he has this opportunity at a time of crisis to show some leadership and show some compassion and not be completely tone deaf. And what he's asking his audience to do, including, you know, Ukrainian refugees and people still in Ukraine apparently, is thank people in the Jehovah's Witness hierarchy. Oh, let's all say thank you, shall we, to people in the branch. That's what we need to do in these dark times. Say thank you to people in offices who have formed disaster relief committees so that we can all get our spiritual protection. That's what he's telling witnesses to do. I'm sorry, it's important to contextualize this. You know, this is a war. There's death. There's mutilation happening. And he's wanting his audience to say thank you to his minions.
Of course, we will also continue to pray for all of you, dear brothers, that Jehovah will wrap his loving arms around you and give you everything that you need. But especially that he will help you to keep your most precious possession, your relationship with him. So, dear brothers and sisters, it has been a wonderful privilege for me to be able to speak to you today. I wish I had the opportunity to also go to Ukraine and visit, but the governing body told me, don't go to Ukraine. So this is as close as I can get. But dear brothers, may the blessing of Jehovah continue to be with you all. And may you all continue to keep your eyes toward Jehovah. Because in the near future, all of these bad things will be wiped out forever. And then we will never, ever have to think about them again. How wonderful that will be.
I think that part bears repeating.
To Ukraine and visit. And sisters, it has been a wonderful privilege for me to be able to speak to you today. I wish I had the opportunity to also go to Ukraine and visit, but the governing body told me, don't go to Ukraine. So this is as close as I can get. But dear brothers, may the blessing of Jehovah continue to be with you all.
So here's my issue here. I think that I'm going to try to be as accommodating as possible and as fair as possible. I've heard it said by someone who recently left the Wallkill facility and has worked with Mr. Sanderson, with Mark. I've heard it said that he is kind of the governing body member nowadays. He's sort of the one who is kind of helming things. Even though it's supposed to be a governing body, he seems to have very quickly taken a very influential position. That's how I read what was said by Daniel Graves when I interviewed Daniel on the channel. Please check out the interview if you haven't done so already. I actually think that Mark Sanderson is arguably the most coherent and easy to listen to governing body member. I'm surprised he doesn't get used more in the propaganda. He's certainly more compelling to listen to than the likes of Tony Morris or Stephen Lett. But I think that he kind of knows that he's more compelling, and he knows that he's more influential. And I again, trying not to be too unfair, I wonder to what extent he likes to be perceived as sort of the action man of the governing body, because when there was the Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines and they showed the response by Jehovah's Witnesses, he was there in the Philippines helping with the aid efforts on camera. So he had his camera crew with him when he went to the Philippines to show that he was involved. When the verdict was passed for the Russian ban, he was there in Russia and he was photographed and filmed at the court hearing in Russia. And now he's just mentioned in passing at the conclusion of his talk in Warsaw, you know what, I would have gone to Ukraine, I wanted to, but the governing body stopped me. And I find that interesting, not just in terms of, Mark, again, seemingly having this persona of the action man of the governing body, whether that's something he's consciously cultivating or whether that's just the way things are, because he is, after all, the youngest governing body member. Apart from all of that, what does it... For me, it's kind of like a false modesty. It's kind of like reminding Jehovah's Witnesses right at the end of his talk of who he is and his importance, and the fact that, he is a governing body member and he has power. That's the overriding, I think, message there, just towards the end. And I also can't help but wonder what this means in the context of governing bodies supposedly, the governing body, I should say, supposedly reaching all of their decisions unanimously. That's how things are supposed to be, isn't it? The governing body reaches decisions unanimously. So if that's the case, why is he saying of a governing body decision, i.e., Mark Sanderson isn't to go to Ukraine, that he felt differently? If he is of the governing body, one of the faithful slave, it shouldn't be a case of, well, I wanted to go, but the governing body stopped me. It should be a case of the governing body felt, myself included, that it would be inappropriate for me to go to Ukraine. But he's almost distinguishing himself as separate in some way to the governing body. Either things are unanimous or they're not. And if he is making it clear, uninvited, by the way, that he had a difference of opinion with the governing body, it's almost as though he is encouraging what Daniel Graves has already suggested, which is that he's sort of on a different level, or can be thought of slightly differently to the rest of the governing body. Very, very odd thing to say at the end of the talk there, and you wonder how that will have been received in Ukraine by Ukrainian Jehovah's Witnesses, who probably would feel that they would like some support, they would like, some representation from the governing body, given the fact that, world leaders have been visiting Kiev and meeting Zelensky and that kind of thing. They're seeing all of this on their TV screens or, they're seeing it on Twitter or wherever, that worldly leaders are coming to Ukraine to show solidarity. And then Mark Sanderson comes along and says, well, thoughts and prayers, brothers. We're sending you our thoughts and prayers, but we just think it's a bit too dangerous for me to go. So again, remarkably tone deaf and worthy of, I think, analysis in terms of, what hidden messages there are in there, because I believe there are hidden messages. I think that Mark Sanderson knows that he is increasingly influential on the governing body, and he's grabbed an opportunity there to hint very strongly at that towards the end of his talk. Fascinating stuff. Anyway, that basically is it. That's sort of all I wanted to say about this leaked talk. Again, many thanks to Jonathan W. for leaking this material. It goes without saying that the reason why we have leaked material is because there is dissent among believing Jehovah's Witnesses at almost all levels of the organization. There are people waking up. I have other footage of a Mark Sanderson talk that is leaked, that is more sensitive and, in my view, more damning, that has been very kindly leaked to me, and that's basically my top priority now, is to share that with you here on the Lloyd Evans channel. Again, huge shout out to those behind the scenes, again, at various levels of the Jehovah's Witness hierarchy, who know something is wrong and are helping activists to expose how human this organization is, because that's what's come through loud and clear, in my view, in Mark Sanderson's comments. And just right at the end, a final reminder that you are watching a fundraiser video. All monetization for this video goes towards UNICEF and the excellent work that they are doing for people in Ukraine, regardless of what their religious beliefs happen to be. So thanks to all of you who've been watching, currently just over 300 watching. Thanks to all of you who watch this after the fact. And yeah, look out for more videos on the Lloyd Evans channel in the not too distant future. But that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.